Cold. Black. Infinite. Beneath the surface of the North Sea, the ocean holds its breath. The camera drifts through darkness thick as oil, light slicing down like silver knives from somewhere far above. For 79 years, nothing has moved here. Until now. A gloved hand, trembling through silt, brushes away a layer of sand to reveal metal. Corroded, barnacle-encrusted steel. Letters emerge, ghostly beneath the floodlight beam. U-864, then the sound. A faint click. Magnetic tape tightening on a forgotten reel inside the wreck's collapsed radio room. The tape recorder whines as if the dead are rewinding time. A distorted voice crackles through the abyss. Dies as Kapitän Leutnant Wolfram. We've been found. The message cuts. Static. Then silence. The camera pulls back, revealing the torn hull lying in two pieces across the seabed, surrounded by shattered glass, twisted pipes, and dozens of small, deadly cylinders glinting faintly in the light. Mercury flasks, thousands of them, still sealed. As the diver's heartbeat thunders in the headset, the voice returns slower now, like a whisper carried by the current. Do not follow us. No one must. Then the darkness closes again. Snow swept sideways across the docks of Kiel Fjord, dissolving into the oily water where the cranes groaned like dying beasts. The year was 1944. The Reich was bleeding from every border. Yet here under floodlights the harbor worked through the night. Sparks from welders rained on the frozen decks. Men in black coats shouted over the wind, voices muffled by scarves. Somewhere in that storm of sound and steel, a new submarine took shape. U-864, a gray leviathan still streaked with frost. She was no ordinary U-boat. Her skin was welded thicker, her tank stretched for oceans rather than coasts, and stamped across every crate being loaded into her belly were the words, Geheime Reichssache. Inside a small wooden office overlooking the slipway, Korvettenkapitän Wolfram Wenzel signed his name on the last page of a manifest. The ink shivered with the cold. The list meant nothing to anyone who didn't already know the secret. 67 tons of mercury in sealed flasks, engineering blueprints, engine parts, and documents for delivery to the Imperial Japanese Navy. Operation Caesar. Outside, floodlight beams crossed through falling snow like searchlights over a prison yard. Below, sailors guided the heavy steel cylinders down the gangway, their breath forming pale ghosts in the air. The metal rang hollow as each flask struck the deck, dull, final, like a coffin closing. Wenzel lit a cigarette and watched until the last crate disappeared inside the hull. When she dives, he murmured, the Reich dives with her. In the engine bay, Chief Engineer Otto Bergmann wiped grease from his hands and listened to the hum of the new turbochargers. They were experimental, meant to push the submarine farther than any before. The gauges quivered. The smell of burning oil filled the narrow room. Bergmann looked toward his captain. They say the mercury's for torpedoes, he said. Wenzel exhaled smoke. No, it's for fuel. Rocket fuel. For a future that will arrive too late. Both men fell silent. Outside, the cranes lifted another crate. Inside it, a small black case marked only with the initials KT. The passenger came aboard just before dawn. He was introduced as Kapitän Leutnant Takahashi, though he wore no rank, only a dark greatcoat buttoned to the throat. His German was precise, accented but calm. He carried the briefcase himself and refused assistance. When a sailor joked that it looked heavy, Takahashi smiled thinly. The weight of an empire, he said, and disappeared below deck. In the mess later that evening, the crew whispered. Some said he was a spy, others an engineer sent to learn the new technology. Nobody knew the truth. Wenzel didn't ask. Orders were orders. The fewer questions, the safer everyone stayed. December 5th, 1944. The submarine slid from her berth, engines rumbling through the frozen water. Snow clung to the conning tower like ash. On the pier, shipyard workers raised their hands in weary salute. They knew how few boats came back these days. From above, Kiel looked like a dying constellation, fires still glowing where Allied bombs had fallen. Beyond that glow stretched the gray expanse of the Baltic, indifferent and endless. Wenzel stood on the bridge beside navigator Hans Kjellström, scanning the horizon through binoculars. Once we clear Kristiansand, radio silence, he said. No transmissions, no signals. The ocean will be our only witness. Below decks, sailors stowed away the last of the supplies. tinned bread, coffee, spare filters, morphine. In the aft compartment, Takahashi adjusted the reels of a portable recorder, its magnetic tape glinting like a dark ribbon. The first week went smoothly until the engines began to scream. At flank speed, a vibration shook the hull hard enough to rattle bolts from bulkheads. Wenzel ordered half power, but the noise remained, a low metallic growl rising from the port turbine. Bergman tore open panels, hands slick with oil. Bearing misaligned, he muttered. If we push her, she'll tear herself apart. They diverted to Bergen for repairs, slipping into the fjord beneath low clouds. The submarine pens were carved into the rock, protected by concrete and secrecy, yet even here the war's decay was visible. Wrecked boats, burned fuel drums, workers with hollow eyes. A mechanic warned them. The RAF is bombing again tonight. You shouldn't stay, but they had to. The vibration was fatal. As night fell, air raid sirens began to howl. Searchlights tore the clouds apart. Bergman and his team worked through the bombardment, sparks raining as they replaced the damaged turbine. The ground trembled with each explosion above. At midnight, a bomb struck the far end of the harbor. A wall of fire rose, lighting the snow crimson. Wenzel watched from the conning tower hatch, face illuminated by the blaze. "Every hour we wait," he said softly, "the sea grows darker." 2 weeks later, the engines still whined. Orders came by coded message, proceed at once. Priority highest, no choice now. On February 6, 1945, U-864 left Bergen. Her hull vibrated, her crew exhausted, but her mission remained. What none of them knew was that the message had already been read in Bletchley Park. Allied intercepts pinpointed her route and timing. In the cold waters near Fedje Island, a hunter waited. HMS Venturer was a sleek British submarine commanded by Lieutenant James Launders, 24 years old and already decorated for bravery. He studied his sonar operator's face as the faint echo appeared on the screen, an intermittent heartbeat in the deep. "Range?" he asked. 5,000 yards. "Speed fluctuating. She's limping," Launders said. "We have her." He had never hunted another submarine underwater. No one had. The textbooks called it impossible. But the sound in his headset said otherwise. A rhythm of engines, slow, uncertain, terrified. Below, in U-864's radio room, Oberfunkmeister Karl Heinrich caught the first whisper of danger. "Captain, strange signal on hydrophones, very faint following our wake." Wenzel bent over the receiver. The sound was there, a low pulse, perfectly even, too deliberate for nature. "Surface vessel?" Heinrich asked. Wenzel shook his head. "No, something smaller." He ordered depth 100 meters. The hull groaned as the sea swallowed them whole. The lights dimmed to red. Sweat gathered on every face. In the aft compartment, Takahashi sat calmly beside his briefcase. He wound the recorder, pressed a button, and a soft hum filled the silence. "Why are you recording?" a sailor asked. "For history," Takahashi replied. Above them, Venturer adjusted course, matching the German boat's movements. Launders made pencil marks on the plotting table, each representing a guess, position, angle, depth. A game of geometry played blind. At 15:10 hours, he whispered, "Set 4 torpedoes, spread interval 40 seconds. The tubes flooded. Valves hissed. At 15:12, the first torpedo left the tube with a muffled cough. Inside U-864, the hydrophone operator went rigid. "Torpedo in the water! Bearing 095. Evasive!" Wenzel shouted. "Hard port." The submarine heaved, engines roaring. Instruments slid off shelves. The mercury flasks clanged together like distant bells. The first torpedo missed, exploding in the distance. The second swept past their stern. The third, closer, scraped the hull with a metallic scream. Then came the fourth, a blinding flash. The control room dissolved in white fire and pressure. Metal folded like paper. Air turned liquid. Wenzel saw Bergman thrown backward, eyes wide but silent. Takahashi clutched his briefcase as the floor tilted, water surging through shattered seams. The captain's last thought before the sea consumed him was absurdly calm. At least it will be quick. At 15:17, the sonar operator aboard Venturer reported a sharp crack, followed by silence. Launders stared at the dial, then exhaled. Contact lost, he didn't cheer. No one did. They had just changed naval warfare forever. but all they felt was the weight of the ocean closing over men they'd never see. U-864 settled on the seabed in two pieces, 152 meters down. Mercury flasks burst open as she hit, the liquid metal spilling like quicksilver blood into the mud. The North Sea sealed itself again, dark and indifferent. For the next half-century, no one spoke of her. In 2003, a Norwegian sonar sweep found something strange near Fedje Island, a long, broken shape beneath the sand. When divers descended, their lights caught the outline of a submarine torn in half. The number on the rusted conning tower read faintly, U-864. They moved closer, filming every meter. Inside the wreck were the flasks, thousands of them still glinting. The divers' instruments screamed with toxicity warnings. Mercury was leaking into the sea ton by ton, and from the shattered radio room came a sound that no one expected. A rhythmic click, faint but mechanical. One diver pressed his helmet to the metal and froze. Through the static of his headset, a whisper crackled. Thin, distorted, impossible. "Dies ist Kapitän Leutnant Wolfram. We've been found." The diver looked at his gauge. The recorder wasn't active. The noise was coming from inside the wreck itself. He surfaced in panic, gasping through his mask. When the team played back the audio, the tape contained nothing but static, yet every man swore he had heard the voice. Since that day, fishermen near Fedje say that on certain nights, when the wind is still and the sea flat as glass, you can hear it too, a faint hiss beneath the waves, like the rewinding of a forgotten tape. The North Sea is never still. Even in calm weather, its surface shifts like a living thing, breathing, hiding. Beneath it lie thousands of wrecks, each with its own silence, each with its own ghosts. Yet none whispered as loud as U-864. When the sonar team of the Norwegian Coastal Administration first mapped the anomaly northwest of Fedje Island, they thought it was a shoal of rock. The shape on the screen was long, metallic, half buried in silt. Then the echo pulsed twice, metal on metal, and the technician froze. "Captain, it's hollow." The patrol vessel KNM slowed. Through the gray water below, the sonar beam painted a skeleton, the unmistakable curve of a U-boat's hull. Word spread fast. They had found one of Hitler's lost boats. What they didn't yet know was that the sea had been slowly dying above it for 50 years. Divers went down in March 2003. The descent took 6 minutes through black water thick with plankton. At 120 meters, light vanished completely. The diver's lamp cut a narrow cone through darkness. Out of that darkness emerged a steel carcass split in two. "Jesus Christ," the diver whispered, breath rasping in the headset. "It's enormous." Across the broken deck, the letters still visible under rust, U-864. The bow section lay twisted to starboard, the stern buried in sand. Schools of cod drifted through open hatches like ghosts returning home. He moved closer to the hull breach. Inside, the control room was intact, a frozen moment from 1945. Levers stood upright. Dials still pointed to impossible depths. On the floor, skeletal hands clutched melted metal. Helmets, mugs, a pair of boots, everything preserved in the cold. Then his light caught something else. Cylinders, dozens of them scattered like coins. Some were split open, leaking silvery liquid that shimmered and vanished into the water. "Base, confirm this," the diver said quietly. "There's something leaking. Looks like mercury." Static crackled in his ear. The supervisor's voice came back flat. "Get samples. Be careful." The diver reached out with his gloved hand. Tiny beads of metal rolled away from his fingers, forming perfect spheres that drifted down into the sand. He felt his heartbeat quicken. Even through the suit, he sensed the wrongness. The way the water seemed heavier here, thicker. When he surfaced, his voice shook. "That's not just a wreck," he said. "That's a time bomb." News spread across Norway overnight. Scientists from Oslo University and the Norwegian Pollution Authority arrived with instruments and maps. The readings confirmed it. More than 67 tons of mercury, sealed in 1857 flasks, now corroding on the seabed. If the flasks ruptured, currents would carry the poison straight to Norway's western fisheries, contaminating the food chain for generations. The government called it the most dangerous wreck in Europe. But when engineers suggested lifting it, the naval historians protested. U-864 wasn't just a hazard, it was a war grave. Thus began the argument that would divide Norway for 2 decades. Should the sea be disturbed, or should the dead be left alone? Winter 2004. A new team of divers prepared a high-definition survey. Among them was Erik Lund, veteran salvage diver with 3 decades underwater. He carried a small recorder in his suit pocket, not to log data but to capture what he called the sounds of the deep. "I've heard wrecks talk," he told a reporter before the dive. "The metal groans. Sometimes you'd swear it remembers." On his 4th descent, Lund entered the torn radio compartment. A tangle of cables hung like seaweed. A rusted reel-to-reel recorder sat fused to the bulkhead, half buried in sediment. Out of curiosity, he brushed the silt away. The reels were still wound with tape, gray and brittle. He clicked his comm switch. "Base, you seeing this?" Old recording device still intact, a pause. "Copy, Erik, don't touch it." He hesitated. The reels were moving. At first he thought it was a trick of light, the sway of water currents. But no, the spool turned, slow and deliberate. The sound reached his ears as a faint whine, then a click, then a whisper of static. "Is Wolfram?" Lund jerked backward, almost dropping the camera. The voice was low, distorted by time, speaking German through 50 meters of salt. "We've been found." Then silence. His breathing filled the headset. He turned, scanning the compartment. "Nothing but rust and darkness. Base, I'm hearing something," he stammered. "Interference," the supervisor replied. "You're too deep." When he returned to the surface, the recorder in his suit had captured nothing. Just ocean hum. Yet every diver who went down after him reported the same thing. Faint whispers, rhythmic clicking, like a machine still trying to finish its message. Historians dug through archives to match the ghostly words. In the Kriegsmarine records, they found a partial entry, Wenzel's last encoded transmission from February 1945, never decrypted by Bletchley. The final line translated roughly to, "We are discovered. Attempting evasion." It was the same voice Lund claimed to hear. For the media, it became legend, the Kriegsmarine tape, a phantom recording looping endlessly in the dark. But for the scientists, the real horror wasn't the tape. 'Twas the mercury. By 2005, instruments showed contamination spreading. Mercury levels in seabed samples were 10 times normal. Fish caught near Fedje contained trace elements. The government faced an impossible choice: entomb the wreck under concrete and sand or raise it. To raise it meant risk. One wrong movement could rupture the flasks. To bury it meant leaving poison sealed forever, hoping it never broke free. Erik Lund argued to lift it. "If we leave it, nature will open it for us." The locals of Fedje disagreed. For them, the sea was sacred. Fishermen remembered grandfathers lost to U-boats. They refused to disturb the dead. Old Arvid Johansson, who fished those waters since boyhood, told the press, "The Germans brought death here once. Don't bring it again." The debate reached Oslo, parliament halls echoing with moral questions no one could answer. Meanwhile, scientists kept diving. The more they mapped, the stranger the wreck became. In the forward section, they found a sealed chamber crushed flat, but inside lay something unexpected. A small brass box engraved with Japanese characters. When opened under laboratory conditions, it contained fragments of circuit schematics, engine sketches, and notes in both German and Japanese. The markings corresponded to Mi-262 jet turbine blueprints, technology that Japan never acquired before 1945. Operation Caesar was real. The U-boat had carried not just mercury, but knowledge that could have changed the war in the Pacific. Every discovery deepened the mystery. Every artifact another ghost clawing its way out of the silt. In 2007, Norway decided the wreck would be buried. Engineers began preparing to lay a protective layer of sand and rock, an artificial tomb for U-864. Before the operation, a final documentation dive was ordered. Erik Lund volunteered again, despite nightmares that had haunted him since the first encounter. He descended at dusk. The sea was calm, the surface reflecting a pale red sky. At 152 meters, his light hit the hull. He followed the familiar path to the radio room. The recorder was still there, coated with new silt. As he aimed his camera, the reel twitched once. He froze. The reel turned half a rotation, stopped, then again. Slow, steady, he switched on his external mic. U-864, do not follow. The voice was faint, fragmented, as if broken into pieces by time. "Base, I'm recording this," he whispered. Copy, Eric. You're at limit depth. Start ascent. Mercury, all around us, static. Then silence. Lund's video feed went white. When technicians recovered him 20 minutes later, his oxygen tank was nearly empty. He was conscious but incoherent, repeating the same phrase. They warned us. They don't want to be found. The tape he'd recorded once again contained nothing but static. When the burial operation began, ships surrounded the site. Barges dumped tons of sand and gravel over the wreck, layer after layer, until the sonar showed nothing but a mound. The ocean closed once more. Fiji returned to quiet, but fishermen swore the currents changed. In certain tides, the water shimmered silver, and the fish avoided the area completely. Scientists dismissed it as reflection. Locals called it the Mercury rain. No diver has gone down since. Yet naval patrols still report faint sonar echoes. Small, rhythmic clicks near the mound, spaced exactly 40 seconds apart, repeating endlessly in the dark. Some nights, when storms roll over the North Sea, coastal radio operators claim they hear fragments of old German transmissions on static channels, half-sentences, cut mid-word. Wolfram. Engines failing. Caesar must continue. Tell them we are still, then nothing. The voices vanish with the thunder, leaving only the hiss of the sea against the rocks of Fiji. The North Sea never truly sleeps. Even in stillness it murmurs, a low, endless sigh beneath the waves as if the dead are breathing through water. After the burial of U-864, that murmur seemed to grow louder. Fishermen along the Hordaland coast began reporting strange patterns. Nets came up empty. The few fish caught near Fiji carried thin films of silver along their scales that glittered under sunlight, like mercury tears. Local radio logs from the early 2010s recorded fishermen complaining of metal dust rising on calm days, glistening like frost over the sea. Scientists dismissed it as plankton bloom, but the old men who'd grown up on those waters shook their heads. That's not life, one said. That's the wreck waking up. They called it the silent sickness. In Oslo, the arguments returned. Burying U-864 had calmed the press, but the mercury didn't vanish, it simply waited. Pressure and salt water gnawed at the flasks beneath the gravel tomb. Geologists warned that a strong storm or seabed quake could expose them again. Then came the first storm. January 2011. A brutal Atlantic gale struck western Norway, tearing through the coast. Waves 30 feet high pounded the seabed with enough force to move silt. Sonar buoys detected subtle shifts where U-864 lay. For 3 days, the sea above Fiji churned white. When it cleared, the readings had changed. The mound was no longer smooth. Something beneath had moved. The Norwegian Navy dispatched the HMS Venturer again for a status check. Among the observers on deck was Commander Ingrid Solheim, a naval historian turned environmental officer. She had studied every log from 1945. Memorized every transmission from both U-864 and HMS Venturer. Now, standing on the modern bridge surrounded by computers and sonar, she felt as if she were staring into a wound that refused to heal. "Begin sweep," she ordered. The sonar pinged, a rhythmic pulse echoing through the cabin. The operator leaned forward. "Getting a signal, ma'am, consistent." Mechanical, she frowned. "From the wreck?" "Yes, ma'am." Repeating every 40 seconds, Solheim's stomach tightened. The number was familiar. 40 seconds, the firing interval of Launder's torpedoes in 1945. She leaned over the screen. "Are you certain it's mechanical?" The operator hesitated. Could be interference, but the pattern's too precise. Outside rain streaked across the windows, tapping like fingers. "Mark it," she said quietly. "Record everything." That night, the ship anchored near the site. The crew stayed on alert, instruments running through the storm. At 0317, one technician monitoring the hydrophones removed his headset and looked pale. "Ma'am, you should hear this." Solheim slipped the headset on. Through the static came a hollow sound, a slow, rolling click. Then a hiss. Then what might have been a voice far away, buried under distortion. "864. Still below." She froze. The technician whispered, "Playback." She nodded. They rewound, played it again. Same sound, same words. 864. Still below. Then faintly, "Do not open." The tape stopped. The room was silent except for rain against steel. Solheim spoke finally, her voice low. "Save that file. No one mentions it until analysis." 2 days later, the signal vanished. The team concluded it was natural resonance, a geological echo caused by shifting sand layers. Yet Solheim couldn't shake what she'd heard. Back in Oslo, she replayed the recording late at night alone in her office. Each time she listened, she heard something new. Behind the clicks, faint thuds like distant machinery, turning. She overlaid the file with the original hydrophone. Recording from HMS Venturer in 1945, the one taken during the attack. The patterns matched. The ghost frequency of U-864 had somehow returned to life. By 2012. Environmental readings near Fedje worsened. Mercury levels rose again. The government considered another operation, this time to raise the wreck entirely. Contracts were discussed with a Dutch salvage firm, but as soon as the plan reached the public, protests erupted. Fedje's residents gathered in the harbor square holding candles. They spoke not of pollution but of memory. "We buried them once," said fisherman Arvid Johansson, now in his 80s. "Let them stay buried." Television crews filmed the vigils, hundreds of candles flickering against the dark sea, the same water that hid U-864's tomb beneath it. Solheim watched from Oslo, torn between science and faith. She knew the Mercury would not sleep forever, but every instinct told her that disturbing the wreck might awaken something worse. That summer she returned to Fedje, this time alone. She stayed in a weather-beaten guest house overlooking the fjord. Locals were wary at first, but softened when she spoke of her grandfather, who'd served in the Royal Norwegian Navy during the war. On her second evening, she walked the cliffs as fog rolled in, sea calm and gray as lead. Through the mist, she could hear the faint rhythmic knocking of a buoy chain, steady, metallic, almost like a heartbeat. She stood there listening for nearly an hour. The sound didn't change. Later that night, when she played back the voice memo on her phone, the pattern was still there, but beneath it, something else, a whispering, low and human. Like breath against glass, she turned up the volume. "Launders, 4 shots. 4th hit." Her pulse quickened. She hadn't said those words aloud, but they were clear. The sea was speaking back her research line for line. The recording cut abruptly to static. That same week, her phone crashed. The file vanished. By 2014, the argument over the wreck reached its breaking point. Norway's Environment Agency issued a statement. U-864 will remain entombed indefinitely. The official report cited stability concerns, but those who had worked the project knew another reason. Several technicians from the 2011 sonar mission had refused to return after experiencing nightmares. Each described hearing voices underwater. One man, a young sonar specialist, was found sleepwalking near the harbor, muttering, "They're knocking back." By now, scientists from Britain had joined the study. Among them was Dr. Marcus Wainwright, a maritime acoustics expert from Portsmouth. He reviewed the audio files from Fedje and immediately noticed anomalies. "These are not geological," he said. "This is harmonic metal resonance. Something is moving inside that hull." The room went silent. "What kind of movement?" Solheim asked. "Could be trapped air shifting. Or," he hesitated, "mechanical oscillation, like a machine still under pressure." She stared at the waveform glowing on the screen. Every 40 seconds a small spike, then 3 smaller ones. 4 total. The pattern of Launder's attack. She whispered, "It's replaying the battle." Wainwright nodded. "Exactly. They ran simulation models. The wreck as it decayed might flex with currents, producing rhythmic vibrations that echoed through metal plates, almost like the playback of old sound. But the precision of the timing, down to fractions of a second, defied randomness. One evening, alone in the lab, Solheim isolated a deeper frequency buried under the clicks. When amplified, it formed a faint human voice. The accent was German. "Dies ist Wolfram. Engines failing." Her hand trembled on the playback key. The line matched the one logged by Bletchley Park 70 years earlier. The past wasn't just echoing, it was transmitting. Word leaked to the press again. Headlines screamed, "The sub that still speaks. Norway's haunted wreck. The Mercury ghost of Fedje." Reporters flooded the coast, but the Navy sealed the site. All further dives were suspended. Solheim filed one final report. Acoustic phenomena continue at intervals of 40 seconds, localized to wreck position. Source undetermined. Recommend no interference. She signed her name and added a single handwritten note at the bottom. They warned us not to open it. In 2015, a storm stronger than any in decades struck western Norway. Winds over 100 knots, waves hammering the cliffs. The fishermen of Fedje gathered in their homes and prayed. Out at sea near the coordinates of U-864, a coastal monitoring buoy recorded data until 3:12, then went dead. When the storm passed, its mooring was found twisted. Chain links fused together as if burned. The replacement buoy transmitted strange sounds for 2 days after, a low hum that pulsed every 40 seconds. The Navy shut it down. To this day, the sonar logs of that storm remain classified. But those who've heard the archived file say it begins with static, then grows into something unmistakable, the roar of diesel engines, echoing through black water, followed by a single voice calling in German, "For the Reich." We dive again. The sea remembers everything, every scream, every engine note, every dying breath carried through its salt for eternity. Beneath the waters of Fedje, where light fades to iron gray, that memory has never gone quiet. When the Navy halted all contact with the wreck, the order was simple: no dives, no recordings, no transmissions. Yet silence invites obsession, and for some, the forbidden becomes irresistible. Among them was Dr. Marcus Wainwright, who could not stop listening. In his apartment in Bergen, nights bled into mornings as he replayed the Fedje audio files again and again, convinced there was more hidden in the noise. The rhythmic 40-second intervals still pulsed like a heartbeat through the speakers. But now in the hum between clicks, he began to hear something new. Murmurs, layered voices speaking over one another. He digitized, filtered and slowed the recordings until words emerged, fractured but clear enough to chill him. Engines, failure, pressure rising, flooding aft compartment. Each line matched the exact sequence of events reconstructed from HMS Venturer's attack log. He leaned back, the room cold despite the heater, and whispered, "It's the boat itself. It's replaying the moment it died." Outside, wind howled against the glass like surf on metal. Weeks later, Wainwright received an anonymous email. No greeting, no signature, just coordinates, a depth marker, and a single sentence. They never all died. He dismissed it as a hoax, but curiosity dug its claws in. He took leave from his university post and drove north to Fedje, the same gray coast now deserted in winter fog. He rented a small boat and equipment under a false name. Locals watched him from doorways as he loaded his gear. No one offered help. On the second night, he lowered a hydrophone into the dark water and began recording. The sea was flat, soundless. Then faintly it began again, the 4 knocks. He checked his timer, exactly 40 seconds apart. But between the second and third pulse, a new sound surfaced. A faint creak, followed by what could only be human breathing. His voice recorder picked it up clearly. When he replayed the file later, the breath became words, heavy and slow as if spoken through water. "We never surfaced." He dropped the mic overboard in shock. The line went slack, then tight again, as if something below had pulled it. Wainwright cut the wire and fled. Days later, his footage surfaced online. Grainy night video from the deck of his boat showed calm seas under fog. Then a burst of static and a distant metallic groan. The camera shook as he stumbled. Before cutting off, the audio caught a whisper close to the mic. "Get out of the water." The file went viral, tagged as the Fedje transmission. Skeptics called it fake, but among the Navy's internal files, Solheim recognized the pattern, the voice cadence identical to Wolfram Wenzel's 1945 transmission. She ordered an immediate recovery of Wainwright's equipment. The Navy found his boat adrift 12 kilometers from Fedje, engine dead, cabin empty. His logbook was soaked but legible. The last entry read, "Heard them calling from below. 4th knock louder this time. He was never found." The government tried again to suppress the story, but strange phenomena spread along the coast. Fishermen began hearing metallic taps echoing through their hulls at night. Radio frequencies near 40 Hz interfered with navigation systems. Divers in nearby fjords reported hearing Morse code through their oxygen lines, random bursts that when decoded formed German words. Tauchen, noch einmal, dive again. Naval engineers blamed natural resonance. Solheim didn't believe it. She returned to the Coastal Command Center and requested access to the classified sonar from the 2015 storm. Reluctantly, they gave her a copy. She listened for hours. Amid thunder and wave noise, one section stood out, a sequence lasting 2 minutes. When slowed, the low frequency transformed into human speech, not mechanical hum. Caesar failed. Mission incomplete. Engines alive. Do not raise us. Her hands trembled as she realized what the sound represented. It wasn't the wreck speaking. It was an active transmission, modulating through modern radio interference. The source signal originated beneath the recorded wreck coordinates, deeper than the known hull. By 2018, excavation drones equipped with magnetometers were deployed for environmental scans. One of them picked up a faint metallic cavity below the main wreck. The structure was smaller, cylindrical, aligned perfectly beneath U-864's broken stern. Initial reports called it anomalous debris. But when imagery came back, Solheim felt her blood run cold. The shape was too precise. A capsule, pressure-sealed, intact. Inside, sonar reflected off several spherical objects. Could be spare flasks, said the technician. Solheim leaned closer. No, look at the symmetry. That's not cargo, it's machinery. A classified recovery operation followed. A remotely operated vehicle descended to the new structure. Cameras streamed the image of a steel hatch half buried in silt, stenciled faintly across it, still visible under decades of corrosion. Maschinenraum B. Machine Room B, U-864 was never supposed to have 2 engine rooms. As the ROV's arm brushed silt aside, bubbles escaped from a small fissure. Then the feed cut to black. Technicians scrambled to reconnect, but the signal returned in bursts, each fragment carrying distorted noise. On the final frame before the camera went dead, a shadow moved inside the capsule, human-shaped but drifting, eyes open in the dark. The command center froze. No one spoke for nearly a minute. Then over the radio came a faint, filtered voice. Pressure nominal. Power holding? The feed terminated permanently. They retrieved the ROV hours later. Its camera housing was crushed inward as if by immense pressure. The memory drive, however, survived. The last data log contained no images, only audio, rhythmic, deliberate breathing. When analyzed spectrally, the breathing contained subharmonic frequencies consistent with living respiration. But no living thing could survive at 152 meters for 70 years. Solheim resigned from the Navy soon after. Her report vanished into the Defense Archive, classified beyond release. But in her private notes, later leaked anonymously, she wrote, "The wreck is not static. Something within still functions independently of decay. Power output unaccounted for. Suggest energy source residual from 1945 propulsion tests. Recommend site quarantine." The Norwegian government closed the area entirely in 2019. Fishing, diving, and maritime travel within 5 kilometers of the site became illegal. On satellite images, the coordinates show nothing but empty sea, yet locals still hear the knocks. 4 every 40 seconds, sometimes a fifth last year, a coastal monitoring buoy briefly transmitted an audio file before its system shut down. The recording lasted 7 seconds, long enough for a human voice, strained and metallic, to whisper one final sentence through the static. "We are not done diving." Morning light bled weakly across the North Sea, turning the horizon the color of cold steel. The waves were calm again, deceptively calm, as if nothing beneath them had ever stirred. But far below that mirror surface, something moved. For nearly a year, the waters above Fedje had remained sealed off, guarded by unmarked naval vessels. The press stopped asking questions. Even the locals grew quiet. But inside a bunker near Haakonsvern Naval Base, a low hum had returned, 40-second intervals, faint, precise. The transmission was back. The console room was small, concrete walls sweating moisture, filled with the faint buzz of outdated monitors. Commander Ingrid Solheim stood once more in front of the sonar screen she thought she'd left behind. Her hair had gone gray at the temples, her voice softer now. But her eyes were sharp, and when the speaker emitted that familiar pulse, 4 knocks, the ghost heartbeat of U-864, her expression didn't change. "Source?" she asked. A young technician answered, "Same coordinates, ma'am." "Depth increasing." "Increasing?" "Yes, ma'am. The signal's coming from below the wreck, 180 meters now." Solheim's hand tightened on the edge of the table. "Below the wreck?" "That's impossible." The tech didn't look up. "Ma'am, the seabed's shifting, or..." Something's moving through it. They reactivated the underwater drone network. Cameras descended through freezing water, past layers of silt and sand until the light caught the top of the wreck, still half buried. Still broken, the steel scarred but silent. Then, just below it, the sand stirred. For the first time in decades, a plume of mercury shimmered upward, glittering like liquid light. Beneath it, the ROV's sonar painted something massive. Not rock, not debris, movement. It was slow, methodical, like gears turning after years of rest. The cameras strained to focus, catching only brief glimpses. Rivets, a hatch, a flicker of interior light through the mud. The operator whispered, "That's another hull." The command center erupted in voices. Solheim ordered them to stabilize the feed. But before the drone could adjust, a deep metallic groan filled the speakers. The sound wasn't random. It was deliberate. 4 knocks. Pause. A fifth. The fifth knock echoed longer, reverberating through the walls until everyone in the room felt it in their bones. Then the feed cut out completely. That night, they retrieved what little data survived. The final frame from the drone showed a narrow beam of light piercing through silt from below, like a searchlight shining upward. Solheim stared at it for hours. The timestamp at the bottom of the footage looped every 40 seconds. It was the same interval pattern that had haunted her since Bergen, but now the loop wasn't static. The numbers rolled forward as if the timer were counting up to something. A week later, the transmission changed. No longer clicks, but voices. Faint, distorted dozens speaking at once. The Navy's linguists confirmed fragments in both German and Japanese, sometimes overlapping. The pressure holds. "Continue, Caesar. We never reached Japan." "Engines turning." The engineers assumed it was feedback, cross-frequency interference from civilian broadcasts. But when they compared the waveform, one frequency stood alone, consistent, steady, artificial. It was broadcasting from beneath the seabed. Solheim watched the spectral display shift, forming symmetrical patterns, almost like Morse. When transcribed, the code spelled one sentence, "Caesar restart." She leaned back, whispering, "No, not after all this time." 3 nights later, the first explosion came. Fishing trawlers near Fedje reported deep tremors, followed by plumes of black water. Seismic sensors registered a detonation at 200 meters. Within hours, the restricted zone was boiling with disturbed sediment and metallic sheen spreading across the waves. From satellite imagery, a circular disturbance appeared at the coordinates of U-864, nearly half a kilometer wide. Solheim was already en route aboard KNM Fridtjof Nansen when the second shock hit. The bridge lights flickered. Alarms wailed. The sonar operator shouted, "We've got multiple signatures, something's rising." Through the hull came a low moan, deep and resonant, vibrating the steel. The ocean around them churned, mercury surfacing in shimmering patches. And then, through the mist, something emerged. At first it looked like debris, fragments of the old wreck. But as the fog parted, the shape grew clearer, a dark cylindrical mass breaching the surface for the first time since 1945. A conning tower. "Rusted, twisted, but intact, God Almighty," someone whispered. The letters were barely visible under corrosion, but they were there. U-864. It rose higher, driven by gases or something else entirely. Water cascaded down its sides. The deck was torn open, the hull steel groaning. No human could be alive in that thing, but still, faint lights flickered inside the tower. Solheim stepped to the window, transfixed. "Transmit hailing protocol," she ordered. "Ma'am, it's a wreck. Do it." The communications officer sent a basic sonar ping. 1 long, 3 short. They waited, and the answer came, 3 short. 1 long, the same rhythm Launders had used in 1945 before firing. A warning. "Back us away," Solheim snapped. "Now!" engines roared, the ship reversing hard. But it was too late. A blinding flash erupted from beneath the waves, followed by a pressure wave that threw them to the deck. The lights went out. Every console screamed with feedback. In that chaos, the comm speaker crackled one last time. "Dies ist Wolfram Wenzel. Mission continues. Operation Caesar. Succeeds." Then static. When Solheim looked again, the sea was empty. Only oil and mercury shimmered on the surface, glowing faintly under the moon. The Norwegian Navy sealed the area permanently. Officially, The incident was a gas explosion due to seabed instability. But those who heard the recording knew better. Solheim retired weeks later, leaving only one note in her final report. If the sea begins to speak again, do not answer. She died 3 years later in her sleep, a small radio still running beside her bed. Neighbors said they heard it click every 40 seconds. As for the wreck, satellites in 2024 captured an anomaly, another metallic shape lying northwest of the original site, deeper still. Experts said it was just debris, but the sonar logs showed a faint pulsing signature coming from it. 4 knocks. A pause. A fifth, and beneath that, just audible through layers of static, a man's voice whispering through time. For the Reich. For the ocean. We dive again. Then silence. The sea closed over its secret once more.